The Supermarine Spitfire shuddered as flak burst 200 feet below, close enough to rattle the instrument panel. Flight Lieutenant Adrian Cole's hands were slick inside his leather gloves. His throat burned from sucking oxygen through the mask. The altimeter read 18,000 feet over the English Channel. November 1940. The sky was a gray cathedral filled with black smoke and tracer fire that looked like strings of burning pearls. 11 Messerschmitt Bf 109s were above him, stacked in 3 loose formations. They had altitude. They had position. They had numbers. Cole's flight of 4 Spitfires was scattered, down to 3 aircraft after the initial bounce, and now the Germans were setting up for the kill. They would dive in pairs, slashing through the British formation with coordinated attacks designed to separate and destroy. Cole's wingmen were shouting on the radio. Panic edged their voices. One was calling to break right, another screaming to dive for the deck. Standard tactics. Prescribed doctrine. Escape and evade. Live to fight another day. Cole did something else entirely. He pulled the throttle back to idle. The Merlin engine's roar dropped to a whisper. The Spitfire began to slow. Not gently, dramatically. The airspeed indicator unwound like a spring releasing tension. 280 knots, 260, 240. The controls went soft. The aircraft wanted to quit flying, wanted to tumble out of the sky. And for 1 second, exactly 1 second, Cole let it. The Spitfire stalled. The nose dropped. The wings lost lift. The aircraft fell like a stone thrown from a bridge. But Cole's hand was already moving. Stick forward. Full throttle. Recovery. The Merlin screamed back to life. The wings bit air again. And in that single second of controlled disaster, the geometry of the entire engagement changed. What happened next would be analyzed in Royal Air Force briefing rooms for years. It would be whispered about in officers' messes from Biggin Hill to Malta. It would force the tacticians who had called Cole reckless and unstable to rewrite sections of the fighter manual they thought were carved in stone. If you want more true stories of impossible moments from World War II, subscribe to the channel. 6 weeks before the channel engagement, Adrian Cole had been the least respected pilot in 242 Squadron. Not because he couldn't fly. He could. His gunnery scores were above average. His formation discipline was adequate. But he had a reputation for questioning orders, challenging doctrine, and suggesting modifications to tactics that senior officers considered settled. They called him the tinkerer behind his back, sometimes the philosopher. Once, after he'd spent an entire briefing explaining why the standard beam attack was inefficient against modern German fighters, the squadron leader had cut him off and told him to save his theories for university. The other pilots had laughed. Cole had nodded and stopped talking. But he hadn't stopped thinking. He had grown up in Kent, the son of a watchmaker. His father repaired clocks for a living, and Cole had spent his childhood watching the old man disassemble mechanisms, study their components, and understand how each gear and spring contributed to the whole. His father had taught him that complex systems could be understood if you broke them down into simple interactions. Cause and effect, action and reaction. When Cole joined the RAF in 1938, he brought that mindset with him. He saw air combat not as chaos, but as a system. Aircraft had performance envelopes. Pilots had reaction times. Bullets traveled in predictable arcs. If you understood the variables, you could manipulate the outcomes. His instructors didn't appreciate the approach. Fighter pilots were supposed to be instinctive, aggressive, fearless. They were supposed to trust their training and follow doctrine without questioning why it existed. Cole's habit of asking, "But what if?" made them uncomfortable. It suggested doubt, hesitation, overthinking. But Cole had passed every test. He had qualified on the Spitfire with acceptable marks. And when 242 Squadron deployed to defend the southeastern approaches to London during the height of the Battle of Britain, Cole went with them, still asking questions nobody wanted to answer. The mission on November 8th was supposed to be a standard intercept. Intelligence had reported a German bomber formation moving northwest toward Dover, escorted by fighters. For Spitfires would climb to altitude, engage the escorts, and break up the formation before the bombers reached the coast. Simple. Routine. They'd done it 100 times. But the intelligence was wrong. There were no bombers. Only fighters. 11 BF-109s flying a fighter sweep, hunting for exactly the kind of small British patrol that Cole's flight represented. It was a trap, and they flew straight into it. The Germans came out of the sun. A perfect bounce. The lead 109 opened fire at 400 yards and blew the tail off Blue 3 before anyone could shout a warning. The pilot didn't get out. His Spitfire rolled inverted and fell trailing smoke and fragments of aluminum skin that glittered like confetti. Cole's flight leader tried to execute a defensive turn. Too slow. A second 109 latched onto his tail and poured cannon fire into his engine. Coolant sprayed across the canopy. White smoke erupted from the cowling. The flight leader called that he was hit and broke away, diving for the coast with his engine dying. That left Cole and his wingman, a 19-year-old pilot officer named Hughes, who had 12 hours of combat time and a tendency to freeze under pressure. 11 German fighters against 2 Spitfires. The math was simple and brutal. Hughes was screaming on the radio, "Brake right, brake right, dive, dive." Cole didn't brake, didn't dive. He climbed, gently, slowly, gaining altitude while bleeding speed. The 109s adjusted their formations. They thought Cole was panicking, making a rookie mistake, trying to climb away from faster, more powerful fighters that could follow him up and chew him apart in the thin air. They were wrong. Cole wasn't climbing to escape. He was climbing to set up the geometry for something that had been forming in his mind for months. A maneuver that violated every principle of air combat doctrine. A maneuver that his squadron mates had called suicidal when he described it during a late-night conversation in the officers' mess. He keyed the radio. His voice was calm, almost conversational. "Hughes, stay with me. Do exactly what I do. Don't think. Just follow. Cole, they're right on top of us. I know. Stay with me." The first pair of 109s rolled into their attack dive. They came fast, dropping out of the sun with their throttles wide open. Cole could see them in his mirror. 2 gray sharks with black crosses on their wings. Their guns weren't firing yet. They were closing the distance, waiting for a clean shot. Cole's hand moved to the throttle. His wingmen would later say this was the moment they knew he'd lost his mind, because instead of pushing the throttle forward and diving for speed, he pulled it back, way back, almost to idle. The Spitfire slowed. The engine note dropped from a roar to a purr. The airspeed indicator began to unwind. 280 knots, 270, 260. The controls went mushy. The stick felt like it was moving through honey. Hughes was shouting again. "Cole, what are you doing? What are you doing? Trust me." The 109s were 3 seconds from firing range. Their pilots had committed to the dive. They were locked in, trading altitude for speed, expecting the Spitfires to either dive away or turn and give them a deflection shot. Neither option was good. Both ended with dead British pilots. Cole kept slowing. 240 knots, 220. The Spitfire was approaching stall speed. The wings were barely generating enough lift to keep the aircraft flying. One more knot of deceleration and the airframe would quit, would tumble, would fall. The 109s opened fire. Twin streams of 20mm cannon shells and 7.92mm machine gun rounds converged on the space where Cole's Spitfire should have been, where it would have been if it had maintained speed, where every tactical calculation said it had to be. But it wasn't there, because Cole had pulled the stick back, hard, and at the exact moment the Spitfire stalled, he pushed full right rudder and rolled the aircraft into a flat spin. Not a deliberate maneuver, not a graceful acrobatic demonstration, a barely controlled plunge that used the stall condition to pivot the aircraft through an impossible angle in less than 1 second. Same maneuver, same deliberate loss of control, but this time he added a twist. Literally, he kicked full left rudder while the aircraft was stalling. The Spitfire snap rolled, spun, tumbled sideways through the air like a leaf caught in a whirlwind. The 6 109s shot past, above and below. Their gunfire converged on the empty space where Cole should have been, where physics and geometry and every combat calculation said he had to be. But he wasn't there. He was falling, spinning, recovering, adding power, pulling out, and by the time the 109s realized what had happened, Cole was on their tails. Hughes was still with him, shaken, rattled, but alive. Cole opened fire. A deflection shot at the nearest 109. Hard to make, easy to miss, but 1 in 10 rounds hit. That was enough. The 109's wing root erupted in flame. The aircraft rolled violently and fell away. The other 109s scattered, broke formation, climbed, dove, turned. They had lost cohesion, lost coordination, lost the numerical advantage that had made them confident. Now, they were just 11 individual fighters trying to kill 2 ghosts. Cole didn't chase them, didn't try to press the advantage. He leveled out at 12,000 feet and checked his instruments. Fuel was low, ammunition down to 30 seconds of firing time. The engine temperature was climbing, oil pressure steady, but the gauge flickered every few seconds. The Spitfire had taken hits. Not critical, not yet, but the airframe was damaged, and every minute in combat increased the risk of catastrophic failure. Hughes was still on his wing. His Spitfire looked worse. Fabric torn from the elevator. A line of bullet holes stitched across the fuselage. Smoke trailing from somewhere near the engine cowling. Not thick smoke, just a thin gray ribbon that suggested something was leaking or burning slowly. "Hughes," Cole said, "how's your aircraft?" The reply came back shaky, breathless. "I don't know. Something's wrong. Temperature's climbing. I've got vibration in the stick." "Can you make it to the coast?" "I think so. Stay with me. We're going home." But the Germans weren't finished. The 4 109s that had stayed high finally committed. They dove together, 4 gray shapes dropping out of the sun in perfect formation. Their attack angle was steep. Their speed was high. They weren't trying to dogfight anymore. They were trying to destroy. One pass. Maximum firepower. Blow the Spitfires apart and climb away before Cole could react. It was a good plan. Professional. Smart. But they made one mistake. They assumed Cole would run. He didn't. He turned into them. Head on. Climbing slightly. Reducing the angle. Shortening the engagement window. It was insane. Suicidal. 2 damaged Spitfires turning into 4 undamaged 109s with altitude and speed advantage. The math said Cole and Hughes would be dead in 5 seconds. Cole keyed the radio one more time. "Hughes, when I brake, you brake opposite. Hard as you can. Don't think. Just do it." "Cole there. Do it." The 109s opened fire at 800 yards. Too far. Overconfident. Their tracers arced through the air like slow-motion fireworks. Most of the rounds fell short. A few came close. One punched through Cole's canopy and exited through the radio equipment behind his seat. Glass fragments peppered his neck. He felt blood, warm and wet. Ignored it. 600 yards. The 109s were committed now. Locked in. Their guns blazing. Shells and bullets converging on the Spitfires. 500 yards. 400. 300. Cole broke left. Hard. Full aileron. Full rudder. The Spitfire rolled and pulled. The G-forces slammed him into the side of the cockpit. His vision tunneled. Blood drained from his head. He gasped for air through the oxygen mask. Hughes broke right, exactly as instructed. His Spitfire rolled the opposite direction, opening the formation, creating 2 targets where there had been 1. The 109s tried to follow. 2 went after Cole. 2 went after Hughes. But they were too fast. Too committed. The head-on geometry meant they had no time to adjust. They flashed between the Spitfires, guns still firing, and overshot by 300 yards before they could even begin to turn. Cole reversed his turn, rolled back level, pulled the nose up. One of the 109s was directly ahead of him. Close. Maybe 200 yards. The German pilot was pulling hard, trying to climb away, but his energy was bleeding off. He'd spent it all in the dive. Now he was slow, vulnerable. Cole didn't hesitate. He centered the gun sight, led the target by 2 aircraft lengths, squeezed the trigger. The guns fired. 20 seconds of ammunition left. 15. 10. The stream of bullets walked up the 109's fuselage. Most missed. Some didn't. The canopy shattered. The engine cowling buckled. Smoke erupted. The 109 rolled gently to the right and began a slow, spiraling descent toward the channel. Cole's guns went silent. Empty. He'd fired every round. Hughes was still turning. Still alive. A 109 was on his tail, but couldn't get a firing solution. Hughes was flying erratically, skidding, yawing, using every bit of the Spitfire's low-speed maneuverability to stay out of the German's gun sight. It wouldn't work forever. Eventually the German would connect. Eventually Hughes would die. Cole dove. No ammunition. No way to help. But he dove anyway, pointing his Spitfire directly at the 109 chasing Hughes. It was a bluff. A desperate gamble that the German pilot would see the diving Spitfire and assume it was an attack. It worked. The 109 broke off, climbed away, rejoined the other survivors. The German formation, what was left of it, turned east and headed back toward France. They didn't circle, didn't try one more attack. They just left. Cole and Hughes were alone in the sky. The radio crackled. Hughes's voice was hoarse, shaking. Cole, are you hit? Minor. You. And Doctrine had failed them. 20 minutes later, Cole and Hughes crossed the English coast. They were down to fumes. The fuel gauges read empty. The engines were running on vapor and momentum. They made it to the airfield at Manston, called the Tower, declared emergency fuel, and landed gear up because Hughes's hydraulics had failed. Both Spitfires skidded to a stop on their bellies in showers of sparks and torn metal. The fire trucks raced out. The ambulances followed, but both pilots climbed out on their own, walked away, stood on the grass beside the runway, and stared at the wreckage of their aircraft without speaking. Someone handed Cole a cigarette. He didn't smoke, but he took it anyway. Lit it, took one drag and threw it away. The intelligence officer arrived 10 minutes later. Same routine as always. Clipboard. Questions. Neutral expression. He took them to the debriefing room and asked what happened. Cole told him. All of it. The bounce. The stalls. The geometry. The 11 109s. The deliberate loss of control. The recoveries. Hughes sat beside him and nodded confirmation for every detail. The IO wrote it all down. When Cole finished, the officer looked up and said, "You're telling me you intentionally stalled your aircraft? Multiple times? Under fire? At low altitude?" "Yes, sir." "And you did this as a defensive tactic?" "Yes, sir." "And you claim to have shot down 3 enemy fighters and driven off the rest?" "2 confirmed," Cole said. "1 probable. The rest broke contact and withdrew." The IO stared at him. "Lieutenant, do you understand that what you're describing is not in any tactical manual? That it violates basic principles of fighter combat? That it should have killed you?" "Yes, sir. But it didn't." The IO closed his clipboard. "I'll file the report, but I'm flagging it. You'll be hearing from command." Cole nodded. He'd expected that. What he didn't expect was what happened 3 days later. The group captain summoned him to headquarters. Cole reported in full uniform, expecting a reprimand. Possibly worse. Stalling an aircraft in combat was reckless. Encouraging a wingman to follow suit was borderline insubordination. The RAF didn't tolerate maverick behavior, especially from junior officers who were supposed to follow doctrine, not invent their own. But when Cole entered the office, the group captain wasn't alone. 2 other officers were present. One was a wing commander from Fighter Command. The other was a flight instructor from the Central Flying School. The group captain gestured to a chair. "Sit down, Cole." Cole sat. The group captain opened a folder. "I've read the after-action report from your engagement on November 8th. I've also spoken with Pilot Officer Hughes, and I've reviewed the gun camera footage from your aircraft." Cole blinked. "Sir, my guns were empty. There's no footage. Not from the engagement. From a training flight 3 weeks ago. You were practicing low-speed handling. You stalled the aircraft. Recovered. Stalled it again. Multiple times. The camera was running." Cole said nothing. He'd forgotten about that flight. The wing commander leaned forward. "Lieutenant, Why were you practicing deliberate stalls? To understand the aircraft's behavior at the edge of the envelope, sir. To know exactly how it responds when you push it past normal limits. And you believe this knowledge would be useful in combat? Yes, sir. Why? Cole hesitated. Then he said, because German pilots expect us to fight within the envelope. They expect speed, energy, maneuverability within normal flight parameters. If you can operate outside that envelope, even for a second, you create confusion. Confusion creates mistakes. Mistakes create opportunities. The flight instructor smiled, just slightly. You've described energy management theory. Advanced concepts we teach to test pilots, not operational fighter pilots. I read about it, sir, in a pre-war journal. And you decided to apply it in combat without testing it first, without approval, without telling anyone. Cole looked down. Yes, sir. Cole blinked. You want to teach pilots to stall in combat? We want to teach them that stalling is a tool, not a death sentence. That loss of control, if deliberate and brief, can be a tactical advantage. You've proven it works. Now we need to know why. Marshall gave a eulogy. He described the November 8th engagement, the 11 109s, the impossible odds, the 1-second stall that changed everything. Adrian Cole taught us that the most dangerous thing in the sky isn't the enemy, the Air Vice Marshal said. It's certainty. The certainty that there's only one way to fight. The certainty that Doctrine is always right. The certainty that survival means doing what everyone else does. He paused, looked at the assembled mourners. Adrian refused to be certain. He questioned everything. And in questioning, he found answers that saved not just his own life, but the lives of dozens of pilots who learned from him. The Air Vice Marshal folded his notes. He was called crazy, called reckless, called a risk to his squadron. And then, in 90 seconds over the English Channel, he proved that crazy and brilliant are sometimes the same thing. The chapel was quiet except for the rain on the windows. Later, at the reception, a young RAF pilot approached the Air Vice Marshal. He was in his mid-20s, newly assigned to a fighter squadron. He asked if the stall maneuver was still taught. The Air Vice Marshal shook his head. Not anymore. Modern fighters are too fast, too complex. The principle still applies, but the execution is different. What principle? That the enemy's expectations are your weapon. That predictability is death. That the pilot who can operate in the space where others refuse to go will always have an advantage. The young pilot nodded. He thanked the Air Vice Marshal and walked away. But the words stayed with him. They would stay with him through his entire career, because the lesson wasn't about stalling. It wasn't about Spitfires or 109s or long-dead battles over gray water. The lesson was about thinking when everyone else was reacting, about seeing possibilities where others saw only rules, about having the courage to trust your own judgment when the stakes were life and death. Adrian Cole had that courage. He had it when his squadron mates mocked him, when his commanders doubted him, when 11 German fighters had him cornered at 18,000 feet with nowhere to run, and in the single second when he let his aircraft fall out of the sky. He proved that survival doesn't always look like courage. Sometimes it looks like madness. Sometimes it looks like suicide. Until it works. And then it looks like genius. If you enjoy real World War II stories, where skill and courage change history, subscribe for more. The sky doesn't forgive mistakes. It doesn't care about your training or your rank or your doctrine. It only responds to physics. And the pilot who understands that, who uses it, who refuses to be limited by what everyone else believes is possible, will always have an edge. Adrian Cole understood that. He lived it. And in 90 seconds of impossible combat, he proved something that would echo through generations of fighter pilots. That the most powerful weapon in any aircraft isn't the guns or the engine or the airframe. It's the mind of the pilot who refuses to accept that impossible means impossible, even when everything is telling them to give up and die. Especially then.